Today we talk about why I became a fertility doctor.
I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.
Today's episode's a little bit different. Normally I'm talking about educational topics, but today I want to educate you about me. Why did I become a fertility doctor? Did I do it for the money? Did I do it for the fame? Did I do it to improve my Fortnite career? By educating you a little bit more about me, it might help you understand why I do this podcast. Now, a lot of people think the reason I became a fertility doctor is because I have infertility myself, and that's actually the farthest from the truth. I never thought that I would have problems with fertility from the standpoint of needing to be a fertility doctor. Matter of fact, there was a point in time where I thought about becoming a gynecological oncology surgeon because I like doing surgery. But let's go back further. Basically, I love kids, and I knew someday I wanted to be a parent. That was the most important thing for me to be in life. Honestly, I didn't even care if I had to adopt kids. I just knew I wanted to be a dad someday. So you could say I kind of had this feeling that kids were important. And it's kind of weird because growing up, we didn't really have that type of family. But for some reason, it was just something I really grasped onto. I used to actually babysit and used to love doing it. And that's probably one of the reasons I became a nurse first, because you want to help people. And nursing is one of those things where you get to directly help people. When I see someone on the street, I want to give them a place to sleep. If I see someone hungry, I want to give them food. But there was a point in my life that really made a change. And that's when I was growing up, my best friend's brother wasn't able to have kids. Now, at the time, I didn't know exactly why they couldn't. But what I did know was it was a really big deal. See, I grew up in Mesa, Arizona. And in Mesa, Arizona, there are a lot of LDS members, also known as Mormons. And for them, it's very important to have kids. And so my best friend, who is also LDS, when they were not able to have kids, I could see the hurt. And I could see almost this feeling of inadequacy in her, that she wasn't able to have kids and she felt like she didn't belong. It was at that time I realized that having kids wasn't just something we want, but it almost gave us a feeling of purpose. For her, kids were a purpose. There was a pressure on her to have these kids. There was a feeling that she didn't bring this to the relationship. Now, at that time, I couldn't do anything, but it had an impression on me. And that impression was, I really wish I could help people. But I wasn't sure yet that I wanted to be a fertility doctor, but it's something that held with me. In nursing, I had a great time. I loved being a nurse. And I went to an externship and became a surgical nurse. Greatest job in the world, by the way, if you're ever a nurse. And when I went to the surgical area and learned it and got a job at Mayo Clinic, they asked me if I would be willing to work in the gynecological area. Now, pretty interesting. Nobody wants to work in gynecology when it comes to surgery. For some reason, it's like a taboo area. No one wants to go there, especially men. However, I didn't care. I was like, sure, I'll do it. And I went into it. And I took on that job with a lot of seriousness. And I really loved it. What I loved about it were the people that I worked with. And I loved the fact that I was able to be an advocate for these patients while they were asleep under anesthesia. See, when you're asleep, the surgical coordinator is there to make sure that no one's leaning on you and, making sure that you're covered up. And so it would be important for me that if we weren't working on a certain area, make sure it was covered up to give that patient the respect and modesty they deserve, even if they're asleep. You could say I was kind of a feminist in some ways. I really felt good to help women. And probably because when I was raised mainly by my mom and not until later in life with my dad. So one day, I'm doing surgery, helping out the surgeons, and a new surgeon comes in, Dr. Anita Singh. She was an REI doctor at Mayo Clinic, and she was doing a case. And I was blown away. Not only was she one of the most amazing physicians I've ever met, but I was really impressed about her knowledge base. I was really impressed with the whole anatomy that she understood as she was explaining Mullerian anomalies to me. And so I got the chance to spend time with their clinic as a fourth-year medical student. So now I'm out of nursing. I'm in medical school. I knew I wanted to be a gynecologist because I thought, man, these are the most amazing people. In surgery, I felt most of the other surgeons were kind of jerks, whereas the gynecologists, they were all so nice. They were great surgeons. I thought, okay, this is where I want to be. I'm a nice guy. I don't really want to be with those mean people. And so in my 4th year, I did this rotation in REI and I fell in love with it. What I learned at that time was that REI doctors are the nerds of OBGYN doctors. They are the doctors who want to learn every little tiny thing. They want to figure things out like it's a puzzle. Because what most people don't understand about reproductive doctors are they're reproductive endocrinologists and infertility specialists, which means we are the specialist when it comes to hormones, when it comes to all the endocrine hormones that go in the body. And so, like I said, we are the nerds. And this is going to be a surprise for some of you, but I am a nerd. And I said, oh my goodness, I love this place. It was like nerd heaven. It was at that time I knew I want to be a fertility doctor. And then I remembered also my best friend's brother. I remember how hurt they were. And I thought, what if I can make a difference? What if I could become an REI doctor and I can help those who couldn't get helped? Maybe I can make it more affordable because I didn't come from a rich background. And so I was used to not having things. And so affordability was a very important thing to me. I felt like everyone should be able to have a child, and I felt like money shouldn't matter. Now, I didn't know I was going to become a fertility doctor because it's very competitive. So I had to go to med school like I did. I went and did a residency at Mayo Clinic. And then I was very fortunate. I was able to get into the reproductive medicine fellowship, where I spent 3 years and did my training and then became a reproductive doctor. But along the way, something happened. It was during my 2nd year of residency. My wife and I were thinking about having kids. Now, to be fair, when I say thinking about having kids, we were trying for many years before then, but we just thought, okay, when it happens, it happens. Just like most of you, we didn't realize that it should have happened within the first 6 months. And so I thought, well, let me just start with something simple, a semen analysis. And so I went into semen analysis, and later that day, it came back. Now, I can tell you, it was a very weird process. That was my first introduction to reproductive medicine. At Mayo, they literally put you in like a steel room. There's just steel everywhere. There is nothing that isn't steel. You feel like you're almost in an experiment. And then you have to give your sample. It's very weird. You hit a button, someone comes in, they get it from you, and then you just leave. But later that day, I saw the sample and I couldn't believe it. They weren't just bad numbers. They were horrible numbers. And then it kind of made sense. I realized, now I know why we didn't get pregnant all those years. We weren't just not lucky, but we probably have a problem. So like anyone, we went and we saw the fertility doctor, and then we found out we had other issues. My wife, although probably wouldn't have any problems getting pregnant if it wasn't for my sperm issues, she also had some issues. She didn't make a lot of eggs. So she had diminished ovarian reserve, but again, the biggest problem was still me. And so we knew we had to go to IVF. Now remember, I'm not a fertility doctor yet. I'm just a resident in OBGYN residency. So now we're getting ready to go through the IVF process, and they tell me how much it's going to cost. It was at least $20,000. And I remember thinking at that time, not only do we not have $20,000, but I don't think we're ever going to have $20,000 for the next 7 years. Because when you're in residency or fellowship, you don't make a lot of money. I think I was making like $30,000 a year. And that's when I started realizing I may never have kids. Not sure I could have used donor sperm and we could have looked at other options like adoption, but I'm just saying at that moment, I felt like there was no way I was going to have kids. Now, I was very fortunate. At my work, they allowed you to pay for those expenses over 2 years by taking out of your paycheck. Although it was a very large expense, it was still doable. And so we did it. But we knew we were only going to get one chance. And it was scary as hell. Because if it didn't work, not only did we have to keep paying that for the next 2 years, but we wouldn't even have a child to show for it. And we wouldn't ever be able to try again for at least another 6 to 7 years. It was at this point that I was really pissed at the fertility industry. I thought, why can it be so much? How is this not important to have a kid? And so I started looking into things a little bit. I started talking to some of the reps because I was already in with the kind of fertility group because they knew I wanted to be an REI doctor someday. And I started talking to reps and finding how much things cost. And it didn't add up. The numbers just didn't add up. I couldn't figure out why it was costing $20,000. And so over the next few years, as my wife and I, as you've heard the story, were successful on that first transfer and had identical twin girls, I kept looking more and more into this world of fertility. At that point, I didn't want to just be a fertility doctor now to help people get pregnant. I realized my goal now was to become a fertility doctor and change the industry. When I say change the industry, I'm not saying change it like it never done before. I'm saying I realized it was just too expensive, and it wasn't because it cost that much. It was that expensive because people were willing to pay for it. And that's when I realized, once I figured out the cost, I figured out exactly how much it would cost to actually put someone through IVF. And then I had an idea. I'm going to start my own clinic someday. Now, it's easy to say that, but it's not easy to do. So just like anybody, I got out of fellowship. I went and worked with another doctor, fantastic doctor, had a very good career for a few years. And then we went our separate ways and I started a clinic. But what's interesting is before I started that clinic, I've always wanted to do this. And what helped me do that was one day I was on the plane and I'm a pretty friendly person. So just started talking to the guy next to me and he was a business guy. And we were talking about different industries. I was telling him how messed up this fertility industry was and how I wanted to go in there and change that industry. And he started giving me basically a full lesson in business about what I wanted to do and how it's been done in other industries. It was that point that I was motivated. Again, I didn't have the ability to do that on day one. But 3 years into my career, I had the ability. Now, it was not without risk. I had to basically put up everything, my home, my family, to be able to try this. But I did it because my wife and I believed in one thing. The reason I went into this is to help people. And the reason I wanted to make my own clinic, because I wanted to change the industry. And so now, 11 years forward, we have a very successful clinic. But what we're doing is that we're not resting on the fact that we made it affordable. We focus on the fact that we offer great quality care and high pregnancy rates. There's nothing that brings me more happiness than when someone comes to me and says, I would have never been able to get pregnant anywhere else. Thank goodness you guys are here offering affordable care. And I'm not done. I want to even be more affordable. I want to have more accessibility. And I want people to be educated more. So that way they don't even have to get into these situations where they need fertility treatment, but know early on in their lives that they have diminished ovarian reserve. Although there were many things that made me on the path to become a fertility doctor, such as becoming a nurse, getting that job at Mayo Clinic and getting in the gynecological field, and meeting Dr. Anita Singh. The thing is that my experiences is what made me the fertility doctor I am today. And that doesn't mean that other doctors can't be great without going through this path. But I thought it'd be good for you to know this path, have a better idea about me, and understand one of the reasons I do this podcast is because I remember when my wife and I went through, everything was very generic. It was just kind of like the basic of fertility. There was nothing that really told me, why? Why is a doctor doing that? What's the science behind that? Now, I appreciate there's the internet now and you can look things up, but back then there wasn't. And even today, I've listened to some other podcasts. I've listened to some of those episodes and it's very generic. So when I do these podcasts, it's because I want to bring something that wasn't there when my wife and I went through. And as we branch out our clinic to more and more areas, I want everyone to know that I believe fertility care is a basically human right. And I don't say that jokingly like some people will say about some things. I'm not saying that everyone needs to pay for other people to have babies. But what I am saying is that we all benefit from other people having babies. And so although I don't have the right answer of how to make this mandatory for everyone, I do think it would benefit us all to eventually have it where everyone has that right. And at least I'm going to do my part. I'm going to try to help by making fertility more affordable more accessible, and doing with every bit of heart I have. I know this wasn't a traditional episode that might have been boring for some of you, but for those who have listened to this podcast or wanted to know a little bit about me and what got me into this, I thought it'd be a nice show for you. As always, if you like this show, give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium. And if you also like having your questions answered, go to our new show, Sperm Meets Egg, on every other Wednesday at 6 p.m. I look forward to talking to you guys again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.